Dave Fraser, founder, executive chairman of RZ Resources, also international male model, straight off the runways of Milan. Hey? Thank you very much for joining us today, Dave.
Thank you, Toddy.
You've got an absolutely an amazing business in RZ Resources that you started 12 years ago, overnight success, critical mineral space. Mate, can you talk to us today about the importance of Australian critical minerals to not only the Indo-Pacific, but I guess globally?
Yeah, thanks again for having me, Toddy. And it's certainly a topic I'm really passionate about, as you know. And again, I think when I started the company 12 years ago, the words critical and minerals weren't really necessarily attached. It's really been, I think, and I think everyone's felt and seen it, when something like Ukraine gets invaded by such a powerhouse like Russia, you see the mood change overnight. And I think I've mentioned to you before that I just happened to be in London at the time that occurred. And even watching the way that banks were jumping on what this really meant for the world stage in terms of funding projects. And again, we were meeting with people in mines and metals. So what was considered on the first day we met quite as a sort of a mineral sands, rare earth sort of play. Next day became a critical minerals company. That's really, and you felt it straight away. And one of the reasons for that too is that countries like Russia supply a huge amount of the world's critical minerals. So, I mean, I can only really talk to what we do, and I'll come to that in a second, but let's just focus on one of them, the titanium market. So for the likes of a company like Boeing will get 30% of their titanium for their planes out of Russia. So when embargoes get put on and things change overnight, you can imagine those relationships change pretty quickly. And that's a big issue. So when we talk about things like defence and why are these so critical, you also link it back into supply chain. So where do you access these products? So if we then come back to Australia and say Australian critical minerals, why do we have such a role to play? Because we've got the products here. And again, traditionally and particularly in our stuff, so let me talk to you a bit about RZ Resources and what we do. RZ Resources is an Australian-owned company. Yes, it was started 12 years ago, and it takes that long to really build something real, to get something up and running. And, we've got the privilege to be in an area where we've got a globally large resource, and what we are looking to at some point mine is titanium products, Zircon, and also rare earths. And one of the really unique things about our business too is that we've got this mineral processing plant here in Brisbane that was originally owned by at one point Iluka, Consolidated Rutile, and then Sibelco. So it's ready to go. And why it makes us why it's so important for us as an asset is it allows us not just to do what most of us do, pull it out of the ground, stick it on a ship and send it overseas for further processing. We can actually process here in Australia. And why that's really important, again, we talk about one thing is critical minerals, but the next piece is that how do we value add? And why is value adding important? Because it allows us to choose the countries that we then want to supply to. Because if I'm just going to pull it out of the ground, this is part of the problem in terms of the world in general. We haven't invested a lot in further processing or downward processing. A lot of what we do again is we just dig it out of the ground, we sell it off. And you can imagine, therefore, the rise of countries like China, because they're willing to take on these products, and they often are more complicated to process, and we therefore haven't invested in our own backyard. So when we talk about Australian-made, we talk about, control of our own destiny, control of supply chains. You talk about AUKUS, which may become JAUKUS soon. How do we control that? And a lot of it starts with upstream. So where are these projects? What have they got? What do they go into in terms of supply chain? And frankly, how do we help try and control that next level of processing, which is all about downward processing here and downstream processing here in Australia. So, and then why is that important? Because all of our products I just mentioned before goes into electronic vehicles, mobile phones, wind turbines. So you're talking about clean energy, the transformation towards net zero. So all of those things are so important. Aviation, aerospace. Let's talk about defence. So drone technologies. Even when we talk about things at the moment, which is becoming more topical, part of our products will even go into industries, for nuclear. So there's a whole number of things and opportunities that really come out of these sort of products, and why it becomes so important. So then controlling that supply chain by our ability to go and further process and find finished products is really critical, because the majority of the companies that we actually are sort of compared up against traditionally either owned by the Chinese or the product is all going to one particular country, which is China at this particular point.
Right. And, mate, there's a few billion people in our region as well, and there's a lot of other applications for your product, including things like toothpaste.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's funny, when you look at these sort of products in titanium, I think when I first heard about the idea of titanium, I didn't realise there was a thing called titanium oxide. I thought it was dioxide, I should say. I just thought it was titanium metal and it existed naturally like gold or silver. And no, it doesn't. And there's different types of titanium. But yeah, I mean, a lot of it's used in traditionally in things like pigments, so whitening. You can't make white paint without the titanium. And a lot of people don't realise that. And it's natural, it's inert, so there's no issues there. And it gets used in a lot of our consumables. So if you've eaten a minty, you've eaten our product. If you've sucked the colour off a Mento and you've eaten the roughness around that Mento shell, that's titanium.
Can I ask, is it a Mento or a Mentos? Is it plural or singular? Right, okay, that's what it is. Wasn't sure.
I think so.
Mentos.
That's something we need to delve into.
Yeah, I think we should. So there's a lot of applications, even for people all around the region who
totally. You're painting your house today.
Yeah.
You got a new car, and the colour on the paint, all of it comes from titanium. So even the basic things, your tiles in your home often is glazed with zircon. Your cups. So what stops your cup scratching inside? If you've got really good quality, high quality zircon, it stops that little scratching you get around in the middle of your cup. So it's used in so many applications from something very, very basic that then goes into where I think our world's emerging into these very, very sophisticated products. So I mentioned before, like the mobile phones, like what we want to do with electronic vehicles. So the fact that Australia naturally has these products here is, we're a lucky country. We really are. And I think that's why we've got to make sure that we don't just have the privilege and the right to mine these products, but we start thinking more about Australia made and how do we refine these products. And then who do we partner with to sell them in what markets and what for?
So, Dave, you've been spending a lot of time in the US over the last few years. Can you talk to us a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that, again, with these critical minerals, the US has picked up on their concerns around supply chain. And they've seen what it's like when countries that are processing these products on their behalf, when they turn the tap on and they turn it off, it's just highly disruptive for their supply chains. So I think for the first time, the US has really woken up to the importance of partnering and the importance of partnering with allied nations. So that's why we're seeing the emergence of AUKUS and why that's formed on a whole number of fronts. But that also comes down to supply for them of raw materials. So, they've got their own list of 50 critical minerals, which every single one of our products is obviously on that list. A lot of their industries really do rely on the products that we produce, whether it is lights of paint all the way through to, more importantly, the electronic vehicle market. Again, the technology market, the clean energy market, the defence products that it goes into. So it's just a long list, and that's why they're a natural partner. And I think they've also realised that they have probably underinvested in a period of time in areas like Australia and getting sort of, again, for their own purposes, for their own industries, control over that supply chain. So they're making that move. I think it's really important for Australians to be over there and selling this important relationship and making those important marriages with the not just with the government, but also with companies there that are looking to utilise our product as well for their industry base.
Right. Mate, who are some of the other miners in the region that are currently extracting the same product as you?
Yeah, so even next door to us, and I say next door, I think they're a good 60 or 70 kilometres away, but there is another American business, Tronox, that does exactly what we'd be looking to do. Again, American business, but most of them really do sit traditionally on the edges of the coast, because that's where you found just your beaches. I mean, a lot of these products have been made in basin areas, and they're made because it's sand compacting on sand over millions and millions and millions of years. So it's not like I can just go and develop another one of these products whenever I want. This is something that naturally the earth has to do over many, many years. So again, there is a level of scarcity to it, because I'm not sure about anyone in this room, but I certainly don't like the idea of having to mine on beaches anymore and those sort of areas. For me, it's very about, if we're going to mineral develop, I want to develop in areas where it's the most limited impact, because we need them. We need these products. There's no point fighting it. This is what we need, and the world needs them. So we've got to be realistic about how we do it.
And you talk about the region. So where's your mine based?
Yeah, so we're in New South Wales, and it's an area that sits between an area called Wentworth that goes all the way up to an area called Broken Hill, which I think most will know Broken Hill as they were the birthplace of BHP, Broken Hill.
And Mad Max.
And very much so Mad Max. So when you picture very, very desolate, but very beautiful country too, it's actually a tremendous area. And I think, they can also see the opportunity, the growth that can occur from these types of minerals being further processed. Because, yes, whilst we have a processing plant here in Brisbane, just as importantly, we'll have processing capability on site in that region where we further process there. And I think that's going to be really, really exciting for a place like that. So, yeah, it's high-value jobs, and we need a lot of them. We'll need people on site eventually, everything from seed programs and looking after, biodiversity, all the way through to the grading, to metallurgists dealing with the different types of products that we'll then produce and controlling then the processing side, the engineers. It's a pretty exciting sort of the business to be involved in, frankly.
Hey, tell me, what interest and support have you had from the Australian government in your program, and also, I guess, the New South Wales government?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the governments have really realised the opportunity here. It's not often they've probably had good Australian companies come to them that's growing at the right time. Again, we talk about being in this thing for 12 years. So to do that, it really takes a long-term capital commitment. We've had fabulous Australian investors behind us. And I got to say, whether it's the Queensland government, New South Wales government, even the Australian government, they're all been really putting their head around how do we help these types of businesses like RZ get up and running. And, there's a lot of detail we'll have to go into explaining how much help, for them taking us around the world to help get us connected with other potential customers, to assisting us with, introductions into the different government bodies, and looking at, funding opportunities, whether it be grant money. We're going through at the moment an application with the Australian government. And again, I have to say, we've always found them to be actually very proactive in our space. I think they recognise the importance of these allied nations and how we partner together. And I'm really seeing a lot more proactivity. But one of the greatest things about Australia, and people often complain about processes and how long things take, but, for me, my view is that the reason when you do, and if you ever do get your approvals or your right to mine, it's something in Australia you can take anywhere around the world and you can bank it, because the reality is the what you need to go through, the rigmarole, which you should go through, so that you can prove you can mine responsibly and you can build a business responsibly. It also shows investors that once you get that right, you got that right. And it's the governments have been fantastic, Toddy, and they're trying all the time now to look at better ways to get behind it, because these businesses are a little bit different to your natural, bulk commodities like your coal, even your gold, where you find the capex required, the capital required to get them up and running is a lot larger up front. And therefore, you can imagine when you're trying to work with commercial banks, they're trying to figure out what sort of role they can play. And that's why, I think the government's realised that it's going to be, to get these big companies up and running, we're going to have to work together. So private sector, public sector will come together because we need it. It's not a case of whether we should do it or not. This is going to be really important for us going forward.
And mate, you talk about the capex required for gold and coal mines. It's also a very different process, right?
Completely different process,
and on the environment as well.
Totally.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the great things about mineral sands is that the sort of what we do and how we do it, you're really using gravity. So I mean, I tried to explain this to my kids the other day, and the best way to do it is show them what it's like in a car. So when you've got three people sitting on the back seat, gravity works in a way where you want the heaviest material to move one side and let the lighter material stay out to so the heavy material might go to the left, the lighter material might stay to the right. So what you do is you just, when you're driving your car next, just slightly turn a corner, and you'll watch that everyone just naturally sort of leans over to the left, and then they actually lean over to the other side. That's very much what spirals do. So it's a really basic. I mean, even in terms of water, we don't need fresh water. We use highly saline water through our process. Again, it's Mad Max territory. So, getting it, it just works absolutely perfectly. And we don't need those sort of chemicals through the process to do what we do. But it is complicated because you're dealing with different types of products that have different sizing, different characteristics. So, using that, and then we also use rare earth magnets to help separate. So it is, Toddy, and it's one of the things where we've had to spend years and years of test work, understanding our product, but not just that, also, how are we going to extract it and make sure we can maximize extraction? That also takes years. So that investment, a lot of that's already been done to date, mate. So it is a very simple process. And yes, you're right. We don't really open up a pit like a coal mine and sits there, but it tends to be we naturally rehab as we go along. So to do this sort of product, you're talking about sand, you're only taking between 1 or 2.5%, any one time of the actual mineral out of the ground. The remaining is all that sand that goes back behind you. So, again, how we do it, just picture two big vacuums sucking up sand, going through these spirals I mentioned before, creating that gravity. We extract that mineral, that concentrate of minerals, of the titanium, the zircon and rare earth, and then the remaining actually goes back in behind as we go. So it's a pretty amazing process, and it's a very, very low impact process.
Wow, that'd be attractive to a lot of buyers, I guess, of finished product too, right? Just understanding the environmental impact.
I think it's
lack
everything.
of. Yeah.
I think traceability becomes so important. Again, we go back to the Indo-Pacific for them. A lot of the countries that we're working with in the Indo-Pacific, traceability becomes so important. What sort of impact are you having on the environment? What are you handing back? How are you dealing with it? That becomes so important. I think also, if you look at countries even like Germany, they will provide there's levels of green acknowledgement that, even if you're using, different techniques outside of plugging into the electricity, we're looking at wind farms, we're looking at, solar. All that's going to be really important again for, I think, the end buyers to see that traceability and know that we are making that move towards, again, net zero.
Yeah, right.
So not only are our products going to net zero, but we use net zero to get them up and running. So it's a really important message.
Wow. And mate, you've just come back from a trip to Japan and Korea.
Yes.
Are they different conversations with people there than you would have in the States and in Europe?
Not really. And I think, again, I mentioned earlier, we talk about AUKUS becoming probably more JAWKUS with Japan looking to be included. I think they are in the same, the Americans and the Japanese share the same concerns around supply chain. Again, traditionally processing was done in China. They're also trying to work out how do they build their own capability. So, they're very proactive. And, again, the conversations are very, very similar. They recognise it. It's not easy to get these sort of products up and running, yet we all need access to these types of products. So how do we go about doing it and who do we partner with? So, again, their concerns are very much around if we can't have consistent access to products, that's more of an issue for us than getting people. So, at the moment, a lot of the manufacturers we spoke to that are Japanese American companies in the US, their concern was not about labour, not cost of labour. The concerns were not about demand. The demand's there. The issue was certain componentry they can't get their hands on, and as a result, got to stop and close down plants because it's more expensive to keep something on, off than just shut it down. And that's been part of the problem. So we go back to supply chain, to about defence and supply chain risk. That's why a lot of them at the moment, it's all about securing upstream product. And that's a role that we have to play.
Dave, tell me, does your product have a shelf life?
It doesn't, Dottie. So that's the thing. No, it doesn't. So it can be stored forever. But again, from a business point of view, you don't really want to be doing that if you can help it. But the answer is no, it doesn't. And I think that's really important too, because what it does have though is, at some point, where do you continue to find these types of products as we sort of grow and adapt? So, that's going to be the next challenge, I think. So again, being where we are and in that sort of Mad Max country really does help.
So you mentioned there's another mine next door to you. Where else in the world are they mining your types of critical minerals that you're extracting?
Well, I think traditionally Australia's always had a competitive advantage in our particular type of products. So one of the interesting things I found out only in the last sort of year or so, that whilst China has 87% of the world's rare earth deposits, they don't have titanium and they don't have zircon naturally, hence why they have a lot of ownership of Australian businesses that do. The other areas outside of Australia is Africa's probably one of the strongest. And I think even now you're seeing Brazil starting to emerge. And many, many, many years ago, there were projects even in the US, areas like the Florida Keys. But it's a little bit like trying to do a project here in Fraser Island or, I'm not sure if too many people in Noosa want to see another mineral sand project up on the beach. So I think going forward, there's areas where maybe traditionally they would have been found. But unfortunately, fortunately, really, you don't want to see that. They're not really getting up anymore. So it's not really freely available. That's the thing, Toddy. And I think Australia, often we don't know about these products because we've always been a country that are used to bulks. We're used to iron ore, copper, gold, coal, and that's what we've played in for so many years that the investment markets have got used to that. And now for the first time, they're also trying to get their head around these products and where they go and the importance of them. And people are discovering that, wow, Australia has always had a really strong competitive advantage in titanium products, in zircon, and to a lesser degree rare earths, but that's now emerging because of what they're used for. So if you just do it from a conversational point of view, we're all being impacted by the fact that the geopoliticals have changed the nature of the world. It is what it is. We can fight it. We can try and recut it and talk about it however we want. People are concerned about China invading Taiwan. Ukraine's already been invaded by Russia. People aren't seeing an end date. We're seeing turmoil and issues around what's happening with the Gaza Strip, Israel, Palestine, and it's dividing the world. So, the areas like AUKUS and JAUKUS, if you want to start to call it that, become more and more important. And the world is naturally dividing. I don't think anyone wants to make it that definitive, but we are. So if that is the case, and whether it's not either or not, no one wants to be on the wrong side of history. So I think the reality is, and what I'm calling out to people is that we've got to get these sort of projects up and running. We've got to think about Australia made in Australia. We've got to think about how we can further process these sort of products. We've got to have these conversations. We've got to work together. We've got to partner ourselves with allied nations, because Australia isn't a deep capital market versus, say, the US or even Japan. But working together is how we're going to go and get these sort of projects up and running. It's how we're going to get these industries we say we want. If I look at the next 20 years and I look at the budget, what's being released, a lot of that is around what are the investment thematics, not just the government, but the world's looking at. It's about net zero, so green energy, green technology. It's about critical minerals that will feed into those areas. And it's also even about defence. So we come back to Indo-Pacific and defence. If we're not investing in these projects and getting up and running and controlling the supply chain, then at what point do we have any control at all? At what point do people start cutting us off in terms of how we make our own satellites and how we have our own drone surveillance technologies? How do we have our own EV market? So not that I think we should ever do that from a manufacturing point of view, but again, partnering with allied nations. So I think that's really important. I think that for the general populace and leaders out there, getting their head around the importance and the reality that we're going through, and that we've got to make these commitments now. Because one thing I've learned, even my time many, many years ago, long before Credit Suisse, when I was working at the Office of Economic Development, when you knew there, every infrastructure project we ever looked at never got cheaper. Never 10 years down the track we went, geez, I'm so glad we took another 10 years before we developed this tunnel. It's so much cheaper now. People are less, materials cost less. But the reality is we continue to take our time and not necessarily make calls, because no one wants to make those sort of calls. But we're in a point now where I think the geopoliticals have pointed to the importance of us making these commitments, and they're big commitments, to create the industries that we need to create, because we want to have a cleaner future. And I think that if we've decided that, we've got to get behind it, we've got to go and back it.
Well, it's interesting. I guess it's a challenge that everyone in the region face, most countries in the region face, being Western democracies, is that we're tied to political cycles. So we find it very difficult to make a long-term binding commitment to go and do something. But the thematics that you've been discussing today, mate, are very a lot of synergies with other products and services and industries around ensuring supply and supply chain. To make the region a more harmonious place for our kids.
Yeah, I think it's positive too. I mean, I think that's another really important thing too. I think any time you go out to build a business or anything we do in our careers and lives, you're really doing it to benefit not just your kids, but their kids and their kids and the like. And also, we constantly forget we do love to focus on our own families rather than thinking about communities. And I think that's one of the things we got to make sure we do too. It's not just about my kids and my family. It's about our friends, our family, our greater people, the people that make our community what they are. How do we help them? How do we look after them? So when we make these decisions, I think everyone goes in with the right ideas and the right beliefs. And I think we've got to start to support each other. I see what happens now, and without getting on my high horse, with things like social media, and people seem so outraged all the time, rather than just come together and have really sensible conversations. Conversations should be debated, but I don't think they need to be heated. I think debate's really important, and people recognising and respecting different opinions. But at the end of the day, we do have to think about what's best for the greater good. And I think they're the sort of conversations we need to have, mate. I think it's why these sort of podcasts are important, to stimulate people's thinking and ideas, because I don't have all the answers. You won't have all the answers. No one in the room has all the answers. So that's why we tend to try and get together and we flesh this stuff out.
Yeah. Dave, you had an idea that you were talking about. You've kicked the tin around a bit, around a centre of excellence for this industry. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I think there's one of the things I learned back in the time I mentioned before at my economic development hat days is the importance of centre of excellences or hubs. And I think the reason why I think they're so important is they're all about fostering ideas and getting a better outcome. So to give you an example, one of the things that we're looking to do with our mineral separation plant here in Brisbane is to create, we've got a lab space out there. We'll also have, the technology that lets us separate these materials and make finished products in titanium. But we want to make sure we can also go further. So how do we go further? Can we make more exciting products here in Australia, our own metals? And that means engaging with the universities. So with University of Queensland, Queensland University of Technology, also working with with TAFE, the colleges around apprenticeships and so forth. So and also working not just here, but we also socialise the idea of working with some of the overseas universities, where it's in Tokyo, even in DC. How do we work together so we start to refine what we're doing here in Australia, keep the technology here and refine it more so, but again, bring people together to get the best outcome. So that's what one of my real passions for that plant is to get up right. We're testing different products. It means also that at some point, some of these countries that are selling a concentrate, why sell it overseas? Come to us, put it through our plant. We can test the product. We can work with you on it. We can further separate those products. We can work out where the best markets would be for them. So we can also help them engage in the marketing piece rather than just selling it to one particular country. So, there's a lot of positives, and that's what was behind really that centre of excellence, that hub sort of space idea. And I think we wanted to go further. How do we explore possibilities and not limit ourselves? Because it's very easy to tell each other what you can't do, much harder to talk about what you can do. Because what you can do means we've got to really go in there and we've got to put money behind it. We've got to trial things. And I think what I've always found is that bringing people together gets the best outcome. And that's really what's behind the idea of a centre of excellence for the mineral separation plant.
Mate, it's very inspiring what you've done, Dave, and what you continue to do. And I mean that sincerely. I really want to thank you today for your time. I know how busy you are. And I'm sure that everyone who's going to listen to this or watch this will get a lot out of it. And hopefully we can have a few more conversations around not only critical minerals, but the development of RZ resources.
Yeah, thank you very much, Toddy. I really enjoy spending some time.